Okay, there we are. We're live. Hi, Ranjan.
Roger, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. Now let's just check on to see if this is now streaming. Yep, that's streaming. So we're streaming live to Substack. I've only ever done this on a sort of a one person with me doing it a couple of times. It's actually quite a cool way to have one of our chats. Obviously now YouTube, not YouTube, Skype is no longer. We would have to use Teams to do what we always used to do, which was to speak on Skype and then just download the conversation, if you recall. That's no longer available. So it's yet another milestone on the glorious road to internet enshittification.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew that word was coming. The good news is another friend said it the other day when I shared an article from Bloomberg, or at least I mentioned that there was a Bloomberg article in which they basically said that a woman called Pammy Olson wrote this article, and she basically said that very soon ChatGPT is just going to be full of adverts. So
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Right. Okay. So the format, if anyone does log on and watch this, but you and I had a brief chat last week, didn't we? You rang me up and sort of said you were looking into pension funds investing in infrastructure. And we had that discussion about, are they actually investing in their local markets or abroad? Because there's this big thing about having to attract external investment, and that's some sort of indicator of success of trade deals and government, promoting business and all the rest of it. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit, and you sent me this video, How to Invest in Private Credit, by a guy called Mark Lipschultz. And you sent me a note with this saying, so people are now fairly openly talking about how shadow banking accesses people's pensions in order to very likely invest in public infrastructure, all the while skimming fat commissions. So can you elaborate on that charge?
Yeah. Basically, about 10 years ago, I sent some freedom of information requests to councils asking for copies of the loans they had with banks, because I began to realize that maybe they did have loans with banks, and we wanted to look at the terms. This was originally because we were worried about LIBOR rigging and whether or not it cost, how much it cost people. So sort of deviated into looking at council debt and looking at the terms and conditions of that. And sometimes they were very expensive loans, and that was at a time of austerity, so that was bad. Stuff happened in relation to that. I've taken a break from looking at that kind of thing, but then the other day I decided, you know what, I want to start looking at things. This is an old game. Let's see, because what they said was that PFI, the Public Finance Initiative, also known as public-private partnerships, these ways of financing hospitals on a credit card, effectively, they were all off-balance sheet operations. The government, the UK government, was, due to things like Eurostat and European rules, they had to limit their borrowing in any particular year. And so they decided to go for this off-balance borrowing thing. So on any one year, it wouldn't look as though they had borrowed a lot. And instead, they could get a construction company to build a hospital, pay for the hospital, and the UK government would pay yearly chunks. And the only thing that ever showed up on the balance sheet was the yearly chunk. At no point did the whole loan ever show up on the balance sheet. And that was PFI. So recently, I mean, obviously, over 30 years, much more has been paid than the cost of the actual project. But for some reason, there's this anomaly in in government accounting. Firstly, they were forced to do the off-balance sheet in order to follow the rules. But then they never seem to include the net present value of a project. They never say how much it costs.
Mhm.
Now, ChatGPT does have this thing where it agrees with almost everything I ask it and say it. So I have to be a bit skeptical. But I've been asking it, do government accounts have IRR or NPV? So internal rate of return, at which point they would say if a project has become positive, if it's paid itself off,
Mhm.
or net present value. And apparently they just don't. So,
Okay.
so, so yeah. Now you've got this other thing where, with this new government, Rachel Reeves is saying that why should, as you said, the Ontario Pension Fund and the California firemen, why should they, and Canadians and Australians, why should they all be able to invest in UK infrastructure and not British pensions? Maybe we need to find a way for British pensions to be more invested in that sort of thing. Couple of things on that. Firstly, a friend of mine, he knows someone who works at Senate House. And that person said, unfortunately, I'm going to have to retire because USS or USSS, I can't remember what it is, the university's pension for lecturers owns 20% of Thames Water. And because that's been going very badly, they've said people that retire after a certain date will have the new terms, which are much worse. So people who have taken out pensions are suffering because of bad investments in UK infrastructure, for example. However, the point that I wanted to make was they're trying to force pensions, encourage or nudge or mandate them to invest in UK infrastructure. And the thing that they do, and they're talking about mega funds, and the thing that they've managed to create is called an LTAF, long-term asset fund. The first one came into reality in 2023. They talked about them in 2020 and 2021. There are now 31 of them. BlackRock have a couple. Schroders have a couple. Now, do you remember we were talking about Carlsberg and Heineken? I can't remember which one's which. One's probably the best lager in the world, and the
That's
other one
Carlsberg.
and the other one reaches the parts that other beers cannot reach. Well,
That's
that's
right. That's
well,
Heineken.
that's LTAF. The long-term asset fund is there. It's the bridge between all of these pension funds and the what they call illiquid parts of the economy, which they would not normally be able to access. So you can't buy stocks and shares in some of the things that the long-term asset fund will be able to access. And so this was being talked about before Reeves came in, and they're going for it. But the thing is, the fundamental question just has to be asked: why isn't the government just issuing bonds and paying for this stuff
Well, that's a good question, obviously.
at the lowest rate it possibly
Hmm.
can? Because the old rule was that they felt that they had to go off balance sheet to make it look as though they weren't borrowing much. But in the end, it's ended up costing a lot more because 30 years later, with the benefit of hindsight, you can see
Hmm.
how much it's cost. And this off balance sheet stuff hasn't benefited anyone. So the other thing is, all of these old PFIs are still around, and the special purpose vehicles that they hide in are now apparently being sold into these LTAFs.
Okay.
So the taxpayer is being ripped off, as they always were. But it looks also as though the people who are paying into these pensions are also going to be ripped off because this is completely
Yes.
opaque and the fees are massive. So
Yes.
it's all very well for me to throw stones from the sidelines. I'm going to try and see if I can get more paperwork in relation to this to get something a bit more concrete on this. But that is the concept. I hope it made some sense. Not much more to add.
Okay. So this idea of public-private partnership, private finance initiative, and the idea that the government is attracting investment from oligarchs or institutional funds to fund infrastructure. That's the subtext to that is the assumption that the government has to go to a pool of money that exists in other hands and they don't have such a pool of money themselves, right? Do you see
Exactly.
what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So it's really a question of sovereign credit creation, which gets into questions of the Bradbury pound and questions of the good old-fashioned American greenbacks, Lincoln's greenbacks, and also
do you
dipping
mean
back further, you get to
where
Franklin.
does money come from?
And colonial scrip in the US, which effectively that's what the Boston Tea Party was all about. It wasn't just about the taxes on tea. It was about the British colonies in the Americas were creating their own what was called colonial scrip, and to invest in public and private commerce, as it were. And the subtext from a monetary point of view is actually it's very current at the moment, I think. So it's a great subject that you've picked, but it flows into things like Elon Musk's Starlink, an X, and a payment platform based on internet access. Off-world banking is what David Malone is calling it, and there's a curious overlap with this and central bank digital currencies and control mechanisms, etc. Now, my suspicion would be that the right to obtain a pension or receive a pension that you've been paying into is offensive to central bank digital currencies, and as Carsten, whatever he's called, said,
Agustin,
it's offensive to his view that he wants to control how people spend what he calls expression of central bank liabilities. So from the accounting point of view, okay, the accounting is that a debt is an asset to the bank and a liability to the customer. Yeah. And the customer's debt is a liability to the customer and a debt to the bank. Okay, so that's accounting. It's the Babylonian accounting system, the double entry bookkeeping, okay, which has rules for the rich, which don't apply to the poor or the precariat. And so I think what you've started to dig into is a way in which further impoverishment of ordinary people that have paid into their pensions will allow more looting by the likes of BlackRock, etc. Because the finance system obviously is predicated on money, monetary value, and monetary demand. And people paying into their pensions being a form of saving, okay, that gets into central bank liabilities, and it's a big pool of monetary demand, which the central banks want to control as much as anything else, and governments are in a lily-livered way playing into that still. And so I think that's where your inquiry will actually lead. And there have to be a few layers of plausible deniability built into the structure, so that this is why I think the main encouragement of these people is to invest outside of their home markets. It's a system of franchises and cartels, and they act in a mercenary way in foreign markets, and getting people to do something offensive to their own people, as it were, is quite hard to do. I think it's less hard to do. Things like the Horizon scandal show just how corrupted the morals of institutional and corporate morals have actually become, and also institutional governmental morals. That was, I mean, that when you rang me up and was talking about it, that's kind of what struck me, as it seemed to be a road that you possibly could be headed down. And then, just as another point, the other thing I said to you, I really like your Kolomensky case video that you did on that case.
Oh yeah, from a year and a half ago.
Yes, and I think that's part of a similar sort of process of normalizing basically normalizing the people authorized to work the numbers rackets in different territories, that one being related to Ukraine.
Yeah, just to mention on that one with the Holomoisky case. So it's a year and a half ago that there was a case which I don't think has come to an end yet, where the guy who put Zelensky in power, effectively the guy, the media owner who owned the biggest bank and owned all the steel and stuff like that, and he is the subject of a book called American Kleptocracy by Casey Michel from a couple of years ago. He's in jail, but he was being done. They took his bank away, and they said that he kept on creating loans and lending them to either his own shell companies or his friends, who always made the minimum repayment. But it just felt dodgy. And when I went to the case, to be totally honest with you, Holomoisky's lawyers seem more honest than the Privat Bank lawyers, but that is a separate issue. On Wednesday or Thursday, I went to a talk at School of Oriental and African Studies where Nicholas Shaxson was there. He wrote Treasure Islands and The Finance Curse. And also Susan Hawley was there of, they used to be called Corruption Watch. She was at Corner House before doing stuff on BAE Systems. It's now called Spotlight on Corruption. And Nicholas Shaxson did a talk. The subject of the whole talk was offshore finance, the effect it's had on development and what can be done about it. He talked about the finance curse, how the bigger the role that finance plays in your country, just as before it used to be the resource curse. So if you had a lot of oil, that was generally not good for your country because then you would get looted. In the same way, if finance is too big in your country, if it's the biggest industry, it means that you're going to have some really big problems to do with not being productive, not actually doing anything. And he wrote that a few years ago with John Christensen. So he was basically being asked questions about how people can learn to understand what the offshore system. So yeah, what he said was this: if you are, let's say, BVI, British Virgin Islands, Jersey, or Ireland, or even the UK, if you're this kind of country that attracts money that's been looted from elsewhere, then on the surface, it looks like you're attracting all of this capital, but actually you're exporting harm. That's something that he said that I hadn't really heard being said in quite that way. He said you're exporting harm. He's worked in Angola as a journalist in different places looking at commodities. And then he said, these places which are exporting harm, so to have them articulated like that. And then people said, well, what can you do about the public consciousness? And so he was trying to say, it would appear that people are not quite ready yet to understand the similarity between what's happening at Thames Water and what's happening in Angola with oil, the looting via the offshore system. So yeah, they were there talking about these things. But just to say, Susan Hawley, when she came on and spoke, she spoke about what had just happened in Bangladesh. And she basically said, I can't remember what the lady was, but there's something, was it Ashmina? I can't remember her name, but anyway, she had been in charge of Bangladesh for 15 years at least, on and off, but mainly. And when Muhammad Yunus came in, and apparently he's speaking at Chatham House this week, the leader of Bangladesh, the one who won the Nobel Prize for Economics ages ago. When he came in, they published the different web of financing that she and her surrounding people had, and it was all special purpose vehicles in BVI and places like that. So that whole system was being talked about, the shadow system.
Yes.
And I just thought,
Do you remember the Panama Papers?
Yeah, they talked about that a lot. And so just
Yeah,
just to say, so
because
just to,
there's another papers that came out. It was called something else, which I'm convinced was sort of made up as a way to stop people looking at the Panama Papers.
yeah, Lux leaks and stuff like that. The thing is, the Bangladeshi story was exactly the same as the Holomoisky story. It was about people coming in, taking over banks, and doing these loans.
Yeah, yeah, and of course the famous one was the Bank of Credit Commerce International, which no
Yes.
one talks about anymore. But you know, it's basically the same shell game.
Noriega, yeah, and the CIA and the Coke and the Mujahideen for that one. But yeah, exactly. And so that's what I kind of realized is that now that I'm in my late 40s and I've seen these kinds of stories a few times before, I sort of realized, okay, instead of getting overly excited about one particular thing and calling it a scandal, as you said, instead just being able to say, well, look, it's an old game. What's the latest incarnation? And just refer to it like that.
Yes.
Instead of getting all excited about it.
Yeah, I think you it's a model. And I think it was G.K. Galbraith said that finance is one of the areas where the main innovation is a new name for something that already exists or has existed.
Right.
And so it's one of those.
Yeah, I think I remember reading in Anthony Sampson's The Moneylenders, he who used to write for The Observer and was one of Nelson Mandela's comrades. He basically said, yeah, if you look at how money works, I think he was talking about fractional banking and things like that. He just said, it's so simple as to defy belief. That's the thing.
Yeah, it is. All the complications are layered on top of it. You know, it's Reginald McKenna let the cat out of the bag in the 1920s, didn't he? When he said something very similar to the shareholders of Midland Bank. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, I think it's an important and interesting topic. I did a blog earlier talking about looting pension funds, cracking a joke about Robert Maxwell, because of course he famously pilfered the Daily Mirror pension fund.
Yes.
And you know, I mean, these huge, you know, 460 million pounds were a lot of money when he did that. These days, you're talking about billions. Soon it will be trillions. So, you know, is Donald Trump's big beautiful bill a manifesto for looting in a big way? Has Elon Musk got a point? I fancy that the big beautiful bill is very much like the Specie Act, which was brought in by Andrew Jackson, or opposed by, well, yeah, he brought that in to have a gold standard instead of the Bank of America, the second Bank of America. Well, this is something, it's a point I made to Steve Baker this morning. I sent him a message saying, look, sound money is one thing, but what you need is honest money. And what you need is a fixed measure. You need a fixed unit of money as opposed to a rigged unit of money. And this is the problem, you know, we fixed as in stable, as in defined, because the dollar isn't defined, the pound isn't defined. You know, under fiat money systems, it's arbitrary. And that makes it eminently riggable. And
well,
so,
just on that, unfortunately, I'll have to go quite soon. But just to say that people have been talking about Doge in Kent because reform had Kent. Surely a real Doge would ask for a high level of transparency in relation to anything to do with government finance.
so Doge stands for Department of Government Efficiency, doesn't it?
Yeah. So any actual Doge would call for transparency in government finance. And if we had that, we would have the net present value of
But
projects.
you need it in all finance, not just government finance.
No, sure.
So
I mean,
the issuing of the debt or credit,
you'd
there
also
needs to be transparency with that, and actual government efficiency, government spending, the spending of public funds it's a different question. It all boils back to you want an honest, transparent system, which is auditable. And this is the thing about the oversight and the capture of the overseers.
Yeah, and when they loot
it, Schumpeter called them E4s of debt. You know,
yeah, when they loot it, Roger, when they loot it, then you want transparency, don't you?
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have to head off, but I'm around later if you want to do another one.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be around later. Just before we go, this is headed Fear and Loathing in Davos, the Great Billionaire Reckoning of 2024. So on the page at the Grub Street in Exile blog, that's an imagined article by Hunter Thompson on basically Klaus Schwab being led away in handcuffs with Larry Fink and all the rest of it. Okay. And then it goes on to some points about honest money, what is it? And actually ends with, I'll just click the link now, actually.
Is it written in the style of Hunter S. Thompson?
Yes, it is, yeah. I had ChatGPT do it back in December, I think it was. And all of these issues, there are a whole bunch of things on the Going Direct Paradigm Mind Map, links and what have you. Then there's Rethinking Money, which is Bernard Laitier's book. John Tomlinson's book, Honest Money. The little joke about why Robert Maxwell's MI6 handlers refused to believe he drowned. They knew he could swim in 3 different directions at once. A little bit of speculation there, Bayesian speculation on the chances of Elon Musk going the way of Jeffrey Epstein, Enrique Matti, etc. And then Steve Baker did a blog this morning, Why We're Fighting for a Free Future, which I recommend people should read. It's very interesting. Yeah, so and here's my takeaway: an honest measure must be fixed as opposed to rigged. Honest Money, a challenge to banking, which is Tomlinson's book from 1993. And then I end up with this fictional narrative connections. So just to round it off, the article's portrayal of Fink's arrest and a billionaire reckoning echoes Tomlinson's warning about concentrated financial power. They built a digital panopticon to chain us, forgetting blockchain ledgers never forget. Every backroom deal, every rigged measure, all etched immutably in the people's ledger. Over and out. That's it from us.
All right.
Good
Take care, Roger.
Ranjan.
Talk soon.
Care.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.